What would you do if a stranger at an exhibition handed you a note that told you to stay calm and follow him? How would you feel if he whispered that someone in the corner of the hall was watching you, and when you turned, you saw the man who had taken your work, your place, and even your own son from you? Can a quiet older engineer really fight back when everyone thinks he is finished? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Victor. I am 55 years old, and for most of my life, I worked with lights, cables, and silent metal boxes that nobody notices unless they stop working. I am not a star, not a person people point at in magazines. I am the person who sits behind a panel and makes sure the room feels right, that every lamp and every projector does its job. That is enough for me. At least I thought it was. On the day this all started, I took the tram across the city to a modern art center. There was a big exhibition about light and movement, and the posters all over town talked about a new revolutionary control system that changed the way spaces breathe. I knew the system very well, because I had built the heart of it many years ago. The name on the posters, however, was not mine. I bought a ticket like any regular visitor. The young woman at the entrance scanned it and smiled in a polite way. She asked me if this was my first time at the center, and I said that I had been here once, but that today felt different. She nodded, stamped my wrist, and wished me a good visit. There was no sign that anyone knew who I was, or that this whole show depended on circuits and code that had come from my old workbench. I walked into the main hall, and it took me a moment to adjust. The place was wide, almost like a small stadium, but without seats. White walls, high ceiling, dark floor. Visitors moved slowly like they were underwater. Each step they took changed the light around them. Soft beams followed their movement, changed color, and reacted to gestures and voices. People laughed, pointed, took photos. I watched the patterns, the timing, the way the lamps faded and returned. I knew exactly which line of code was responsible for each pause and each fade. I could almost see the lines in my head as if they were still on my old screen. Large screens on one side of the hall played a looped video. A younger man with a perfect haircut and a confident tone explained how his company had created this system. His name was everywhere, on the banners, on the screen, under each installation description. He was introduced as the visionary creator, the mind behind the technology. His name was Adrian. My full name was nowhere. I walked closer to one of the panels and read it slowly. It spoke about innovation, about brave young designers, and about a new way to make buildings react to people. There was a small section about an original prototype made years ago by an older engineer, written in a way that made it sound like some dusty relic in a box that nobody remembered very well. The text did not even use my full name, just my first name and a note that I once worked in the same field. It felt like reading my own story written as a footnote to someone else's life. I heard a group of visitors behind me. 2 of them wore staff badges from the company. They were talking loudly to a couple who seemed interested in the business side. One of the staff members described how Adrian had taken an old, messy idea from a difficult older technician and turned it into something clean and marketable. He said that Adrian had to deal with a person who did not understand branding and who resisted change. The way he shaped the story, the older person sounded like a problem, not like a creator. I stood so close I could hear every word, and I knew who that older technician was supposed to be. I did not correct them. I just stepped aside and looked up at the ceiling. The lights were running one of my earliest patterns, a wave that moves from left to right and gently sinks into darkness before starting again. I had designed it on a night when I was alone in the lab, listening to the rhythm of my own breathing. Now people called it the Adrian wave. As I moved deeper into the hall, I noticed cameras mounted in several corners. They tracked bodies for the interactive effects, but I also knew from habit that they could be used to watch the crowd. In one far corner, near a column, a group of well-dressed people stood together. In the middle of them, holding a glass of mineral water and making small gestures with his hands as he spoke, was Adrian himself. Beside him stood my son, Lucas, in a sharp jacket and a visitor badge that said Brand Director. They were laughing with some investors. From their clothes and their posture, I could tell they were investors. None of them looked my way. I became aware of my own clothes, simple jacket, old shoes, nothing special. I blended in with the older visitors who moved slowly and read all the text. For a moment, I wondered if I should just turn around and leave. Then I felt a light touch on my elbow. A man about 30 stood next to me. He had a staff lanyard, but no name I could see. His eyes met mine only for a second. He slipped something into my hand, a folded piece of paper, and then walked away without a word. My first thought was that this was a dropped receipt or some kind of promotion, but the gesture was too quick, too intentional. I unfolded the paper. In plain block letters, it said that I should stay calm and follow him. It also said that the man in the corner of the hall was watching me. I looked up slowly. The same man who had just touched my elbow was now walking toward a door with a small sign that said, "Staff Only." He did not look back, but moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the building well. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to throw the paper away. Another part told me to listen. My life had been built on systems and control rooms, on spaces behind walls where the real work happens. If a technician reached out to me in a place like this, there was probably a reason. I decided to follow, but first I turned my head toward the corner of the hall, the one the note mentioned. I expected to see a random guard or a board security worker. Instead, I saw Adrian standing with the investors and my son, just as before. But now I noticed something else. A small tablet in Adrian's hand showed security camera views. At that moment, one of the screens on his tablet clearly showed my own face as I stood in the hall. Lucas glanced at the tablet, then lifted his head and looked in my direction with a strange, distant expression, like he was looking at an old photo, not at his father. I felt a cold wave in my chest, not from fear, but from a kind of clarity. They were not surprised to see me. They were watching me. Someone had added me to their list of risks, not guests. I turned away before they could see that I had noticed. I walked calmly toward the staff-only door, holding the piece of paper low in my hand. A couple of guards were near the entrance, but when they saw my neutral face and steady step, they did not stop me. The man who had given me the note waited just inside the door. He nodded once and motioned for me to follow him up a narrow staircase. The sound of the hall became softer as we climbed. We reached a small glass room above the main space. It was the control room. I knew the look at once. Racks of equipment, monitors, a long desk with keyboards and sliders. From here, one person could change the entire mood of the hall with a few careful moves. The man closed the door behind us and finally spoke. He said that his name was Jonas and that he was the lead technician for the show. He told me that he knew who I was because he had studied my old diagrams when he learned how to run the system. He explained that he could not talk in the hall because cameras and microphones picked up more than people thought. Here, the glass room was loud with devices, and the hum gave us some privacy. I stood near the window and looked down. From this height, I could see the entire hall, the visitors moving like points on a map, the investors near the column, Adrian in the center of them with his perfect smile, and Lucas at his side with his badge shining. Jonas moved to one of the screens and pressed a button. A grid of camera views filled the monitor. One view showed the spot where I had stood a few minutes earlier. Next to the image was a label with my name, my full surname, and a short note in red. I leaned closer and read words that marked me as a possible problem for the event and the company image. I was not listed as creator or consultant. I was listed as a risk. Jonas watched my face. He said that the note had been added by management a few days ago. He told me that he had heard them say that if the original engineer showed up, they had to keep him away from investors and press. He did not repeat every word, but I understood enough. In their story, I was not part of the proud history. I was a loose screw that might fall and make a noise at the wrong time. I did not raise my voice, I did not shout, and I did not argue with the screen. I just breathed out slowly and placed my hand over the small piece of paper in my pocket. Below us, the lights continued their slow dance, reacting to every step and gesture from the visitors who had no idea that the man who started this whole system was standing in a cramped room above them, watching his own name turned into a warning tag. For a long second, I looked at Adrian in the corner, with his group around him and the tablet in his hand. Then I looked at my son, who laughed at something one of the investors said. None of them looked up. None of them thought they needed to. I felt something shift inside me, not a heavy emotion, but a quiet adjustment, like changing a dimmer from one level to another. I realized that if they saw me as a problem, then my place in their story was already gone. I also realized that I still knew every line of code in those boxes, every rule in the old contract, and every promise they thought was buried. Jonas asked if I was all right. I told him that I was calm, and in a way, that was true. When I left the exhibition that first day, I did not stay to see if Adrian or Lucas would call my name. I knew they had seen the mark on the monitor and the label next to my face. Jonas had watched me with a worried look and had told me that he was sorry. I had told him that there was nothing to be sorry about, that he had already done more for me than anyone else in that building. Then I had walked out through the side exit, down the stairs, and out into the cold air. On the tram home, I sat near the window and watched the city slide by. Shops, signs, people with bright bags. I thought about how many buildings were now lit by systems I had helped create. The city glowed with the work of my hands and my mind, but my own apartment was still the same small place I had moved into after leaving the company. The tram turned a corner, and the reflection of my face on the glass looked older than I felt inside. My apartment was not impressive. One room with a table, a worn sofa, shelves with folders and boxes, and a small bedroom behind a curtain. The kitchen was a corner with a kettle and 2 pots. On one wall, I had pinned old sketches and diagrams, yellowed from age. I kept them up not to show off, but because I did not want to forget how it all began. I made tea and sat at the table with my back to the window. On the table lay a stack of binders from the company years, project logs, test notes, printouts of wiring plans. I pulled one closer and opened it. A photograph slipped out and fell onto the table. In the photo, I was standing in the old company lab, much younger, with dark hair and a tired but proud smile. Next to me stood Adrian, then in his 20s, with a shy posture and a notebook in his hands. Behind us was the first test rig for the system, all open wires and metal frames. I remembered that day clearly. We had stayed late to make the timers speak to the sensors for the first time. When the system had obeyed the sequence, we had both raised our hands in the air and laughed like children. Back then, Adrian had called me a mentor. He had said that he was lucky to learn from someone who understood both hardware and code. He had listened closely when I explained why safety limits mattered, why each circuit needed a margin, why a clean log was worth more than a flashy demo. He had stayed behind after work to ask questions and to try his own sequences. When he had ideas, we had tested them together. Those early days had been good. I flipped the binder pages and read my old notes. The lines were neat, the dates were clear. I had written about sensor drift, about user response time, about how people moved in space at different speeds. I had drawn small diagrams in the margins. In my handwriting, I could see a man who believed that careful work would always be respected. Eventually, the company had grown. The lab had moved to a larger floor, and the open plan office had appeared. One day, I had walked in and seen rows of desks with screens, a marketing team, and owned people who did not know my name. Adrian had become head of the company by then. He had moved into a glass office with a view of the river. He had hired a communications team, a branding consultant, and more designers. At first, this change had seemed natural. I had thought that I was a lab person and that Adrian was someone who could talk to clients. I had told myself that different skills were needed and that it was good to have a public face and a quiet base. For a while, that balance had held. I remembered one meeting in that open plan office. It had been a presentation to a new client. I had prepared the technical explanation with simple slides about how the system could fit into their building. Adrian had asked if he could present instead because he said that his style was smoother. In the meeting, he had spoken with energy, moved around the room, and painted a strong picture of what the client would see. He had mentioned my name once as the person who built the core, and I had felt fine with that. But next to Adrian's talk, the client had asked for a video about the company's story. That was the first time I heard a version where I was mentioned as a kind of background person who had an early idea, while Adrian was called the true mind behind the vision. The words had been soft, but I had felt something small twist inside when the slide with my name flashed by like an old note. Later, in the workshop, I had tried to ignore that feeling. I had focused on wires, on sensors, on code. I had told myself that I cared about results, not about who spoke on stage. When the first big project had gone live in a theater, I had sat in the back and watched the lights move, and I had felt proud again. Time moved on. The company grew more. Adrian began to travel for conferences. He came back with photos alongside architects and artists. The company's website changed design. The About page began to show his face first, with a long description of his journey. My name moved lower down, inside a short paragraph about early development. At first I had laughed and said to myself that websites were just marketing, that the real work stayed in the lab. Then Lucas had joined. My son had always liked graphics, design, and social media. When he finished his studies, he had told me that he wanted to work in a modern company that did something cool. I had suggested the light control firm, thinking that it would be nice to see him in the same building. I had spoken to Adrian and had told him that Lucas was smart and energetic. Adrian had agreed to take him on as an intern in the marketing team. In the first months, Lucas had eaten lunch with me sometimes. We had sat in the cafeteria and talked about projects. He had asked how certain patterns worked, and I had explained. He had told me that his team was working on a new brand identity for the product, and that they wanted to make the system feel like a living thing. I had smiled and said that this sounded interesting. Slowly, the lunches had become less frequent. Lucas had started to sit with the younger staff in the bright foyer, taking photos for social media, planning posts, and laughing. When I came by, he had still greeted me with warmth, but there had been a slight distance, as if I were from another time. He had begun to wear clothes that fit the new image. Sharp jackets, clean sneakers, a badge that said brand and strategy. One afternoon, I had passed a small meeting room and had heard my name. The door had been slightly open. Inside, Adrian had been standing at the front, talking to some new hires. He had explained the company's story. The way he had told it then had already changed. He had said that there had been an older engineer in the early days who had built a rough base, but that the real transformation had come when he himself had taken over and had turned a messy idea into a refined product. He had added that this older engineer had had trouble with modern processes and that he had needed to step aside. When he had spoken, some of the young people had looked bored, like this part of the story did not matter much. Lucas had been in the room, near the back. He had not spoken, but he had not corrected anything either. His face had been neutral. I had walked away before anyone saw me listening. From there, direct small cuts had begun to add up. My name had disappeared from some documents. Internal notes had started to speak about the original prototype, without saying who had built it. People had asked me to move my workbench to a smaller room so that the innovation area could look more open for visiting clients. In meetings, when I had raised concerns about safety limits, some people had rolled their eyes and had said that I was too cautious. The day I left the company had come not with a shout, but with a piece of paper. Adrian had called me into his glass office and had said that the company was changing structure. He had said that my role would be shifted to a less central position and that my salary would be reduced. He had tried to frame it as a chance for me to work with fewer responsibilities and more free time. I had looked at the offered contract and had seen that it also asked me to give up some rights to my own designs. I had refused to sign that new paper. I had told him, in a calm voice, that our original agreement already covered what the company could use and that I would keep working under that. Adrian had smiled and had said that this made things difficult. Some weeks later, after a series of cold meetings, I had chosen to leave and rely on the terms in the original agreement. I had walked out of the building with a cardboard box that held my tools and some photos. Only a few people had come to say goodbye. Lucas had stood near the entrance with his arms crossed and had said that he hoped we could still have dinner sometimes, but his voice had been tense, as if he were speaking to a relative who had caused trouble. After that, the distance had grown. Lucas had visited me less. When we had met for coffee, he had talked more about the company's new design direction and about how the brand needed a modern face. He had said once that some people there thought the firm had carried old habits for too long. He had not said my name, but we had both known what he meant. I had listened and had not argued. I had told myself that he was just young and that he would understand more with time. Sitting now in my apartment after the exhibition, I scrolled through my phone. The family group chat was active. Photos from the exhibition flooded the screen. In one image, Lucas stood with Adrian and some guests, all smiling under a beam of colored light. The caption said that the firm was showing the future of interactive spaces. In another photo, someone had taken a shot of the hall from a high angle. I was somewhere in that crowd, but no one had tagged me. Then a new message appeared. Some relative wrote that the show looked amazing and that Adrian truly was a genius. Lucas replied that the company finally had a clear direction and that soon they would not need to mention the original inventor at all because the brand itself would speak. He added a laughing emoji after that sentence. I stared at the small text. My name was not there, but I knew that the words were about me. I felt my chest tighten for a moment, then loosen. It was painful, but also very clean. Any doubt I had held about how they saw me now was gone. I set the phone down on the table and looked at the binders and the photo of me and Adrian in the lab. The contrast between that frozen moment and the messages on the screen was sharp. On the tram, I had wondered if I had imagined some of the disrespect. Now I knew that I had not imagined anything. I had simply been slow to accept the full picture. The city outside my window was getting dark. Somewhere in that city, the exhibition hall was glowing with patterns I knew. Somewhere else, Adrian was telling people that the older engineer was no longer needed. My own son was nodding in agreement. I poured myself another cup of tea with a steady hand and told myself, in a simple, quiet way, that I needed to stop thinking like a guest in their story. The morning after I read the messages in the family chat, my phone rang. The screen showed the company number. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered and listened. It was the assistant from the front desk. Her voice was polite, formal. She said that Adrian would like to see me in his office if I had time that afternoon. She added that it was about the contract and that Lucas would also be there. I told her I could come. On the way to the old building, I walked slower than usual. I passed the river where I had eaten lunch many times in the early days. Back then, I had walked with a quick step, always thinking about circuits in my head. Now my steps were calm, my mind less busy. I felt like a guest coming back to a place where he used to live. The company entrance looked more polished than I remembered. There was a new logo on the glass door and a screen that showed a short video of lights moving in a hotel lobby. Inside, the reception area had white chairs and plants. The assistant greeted me with a practiced smile, then shifted when she recognized me. She said it was good to see me and that I could go up. I thanked her and took the elevator to the floor where Adrian's office was. The glass walls of his office reflected the river. He stood when I entered and came around the desk with his hand stretched out. His smile was wide but did not fully reach his eyes. Lucas sat in a chair by the window, legs crossed, tablet on his knee. He looked smart, confident, like a person who belonged to the place. Adrian asked how I was, if I was enjoying my free time. I said that I was fine. He gestured to a chair and asked me to sit. On the desk lay a folder with my name on it in neat print. I noticed it right away. He said that the reason for the meeting was to make things easier for everyone. He explained that the company was moving forward with new partners, and they wanted to have a clear and simple structure. He said that old agreements could sometimes create uncertainty and that it would be better for all sides to have updated documents. While he spoke, his tone stayed friendly, like he was offering a favor. He opened the folder and slid a few sheets of paper towards me. He said that this was a new contract which would recognize that the company now fully owned the core design and that I would receive a one-time payment for my early work. He called it a thank you gesture. He said it would free me from any responsibility and close any open questions. I did not pick up the papers right away. I asked him how this new contract was different from the original one we had signed years ago. His smile thinned a little. He said that the old document was from another time, that it was written for a small lab, not for a modern company with international clients. He said that it was normal to update such things. Lucas spoke for the first time. He said that this was also about protecting me. He said that if something went wrong with the system somewhere in the world, lawyers might look for names in old papers, and that it was safer if everything was under the company name only. He added that this way I could enjoy my life without worries. His tone was gentle, but the message was clear. Sign, step aside, and do not ask questions. I finally took the top page and read the first lines. The language was formal, but I knew enough to see the main point. I would give up any claim or ownership of the design, the code, the name, everything. In exchange, I would get a payment that sounded large at first glance, but was very small compared to what years of license fees and projects were worth. There was also a clause that said I would not publicly comment on the system or the company. I put the page back on the desk. I asked Adrian if there was any problem with the original agreement. He said no, but that it was not ideal for the current investors. I asked if the company had always respected the terms of that original agreement. He hesitated and said that, of course, they had, as far as he knew. I watched his eyes when he said it. They flicked briefly to Lucas's face, then back to mine. Lucas leaned forward and said that this was not about the past, but about the future, about presenting a united front. He said that the brand had grown, that there was more at stake, and that sometimes people had to adapt. He called the older agreement a piece of history that should stay in a drawer. I felt a slow, steady heat rise inside me, not like anger, but like a light being turned up one step at a time. I told them that I remembered the original agreement very well. I said that it clearly stated that I remained the owner of the core design and the control logic, and that the company had a license to use it under certain conditions. I said that I was open to discussion, but that I would not sign away my authorship. The air in the room changed. Adrian's smile stiffened. He said that I was making this more complicated than it needed to be. He reminded me that the market was competitive and that investors did not like gray areas. He hinted that without this new paper, they might need to reconsider how they used my name, even in the small places where it still appeared. The way he said it, he made it sound like he was offering me a choice between a quiet exit and being forgotten completely. Lucas looked out the window for a moment, then back at me. He said that he understood that it was hard to let go, but that sometimes one generation had to step aside so that another could move on. He said that nobody was trying to erase me, but that the company needed a story that people could understand and that too many details confused the message. I listened to them both, to their careful words, their soft threats. When they finished, I told them in a calm voice that I would not sign anything that gave away my ownership. I said that our first agreement was enough and that I would continue to rely on it. I thanked them for the offer and slid the papers back across the desk. For a moment, nobody spoke. The sound of the river outside filled the silence. Then Adrian sighed and said that he was disappointed. He said that he had hoped we could close this chapter in a friendly way. He added that he did not want any trouble, but that they had plans and that they would move forward with or without my signature. His voice now had a slight edge, like a smooth surface with something hard underneath. Lucas stood up. He said that he needed to return to a meeting. He looked at me and said that he hoped I would not do anything impulsive, that I would think about what was best for everyone, especially for him. The words were framed as concern, but I heard another message inside them. Do not stand in our way. I left the office and walked down the corridor. On my way out, I passed the workshop door. It was half open. Out of habit, I stepped inside. The workshop had changed. Many of the old tools were gone, replaced by cleaner, smaller devices. On one side, I saw a metal frame that I recognized at once. It was the base of the first full-size system we had built. I had made sure, back then, that a small plate with my name and a serial number was fixed to its side, not for ego, but for tracking and safety records. Now, there was a bare rectangle where the plate had been. Only 2 small empty holes showed where the screws had held it. A thin mark of lighter metal outlined the shape of what had once carried my name. There was no new plate in its place, just blank space. I ran my fingers lightly over the cold surface. No one was in the room to watch me. In that small physical detail, I could see the whole process made real. It was not just a story shift or a marketing decision anymore. Someone had taken a real object into their hands and had removed my name. They had chosen to leave the trace of it, but not the letters themselves. I left the building and did not look back. Outside, the sky was gray and the air smelled of rain. I walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench under some bare trees. Birds hopped on the ground in front of me, looking for food. Children played on a distant slide. Life went on around me in a simple way that had nothing to do with contracts and meetings. I took out my phone and opened my email. I scrolled far back through old messages until I reached the year when we had first signed the agreement. The search took some time, but I was patient. Finally, I found the thread with the subject line that had changed my future years ago. I opened the first message. There it was, in plain text, a summary from the company lawyer at that time, confirming that I remained the owner of the core design and that the company obtained a license to use it under stated conditions. The lawyer had written that if these conditions were broken, I had the right to end the license. The message was clear, simple, and polite. It also attached a copy of the signed contract. I opened the attached file and scrolled through it slowly. Even on a small screen, I could see the key parts: my name as inventor, the description of the system, the license terms, the parts about credit, about maintenance records, about payments. I remembered the day I had signed it, sitting in a smaller office with a person who actually understood that I was not just a pair of hands, but the source. On the bench, I read those lines again and again. I thought about the exhibition hall, about the cameras and the labels, about Jonas showing me my face marked as a risk. I thought about the old plate in the workshop, now gone. I thought about Lucas calling me a chapter that should be closed. The feeling that rose in me was not fire. It was something cooler, more stable. It was the sense that for a long time I had let other people tell my story because I did not want to fight over words. Now, they were not just changing words. They were crossing a line that the paper in my hand still drew very clearly. I knew I could not go back to the way things were. I also knew I did not need to raise my voice or make a scene. The system I had built did not respond to shouting. It responded to clear signals at the right time. As I sat there, the phone buzzing softly in my palm, another thought came to me. Years before, when we had signed that contract, there had been another person in the room, a friend from an earlier project who had later become a lawyer. She had been the one who insisted on certain clauses, the ones Adrian now called from another time. I had not spoken to her in years. I scrolled forward through my contacts until I found her name, Sophia. I hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed call. The line rang. My heart stayed steady. When she answered, her voice sounded almost the same as in my memory, only a little older. I told her my name. There was a pause, then a short laugh of surprise. She asked what had happened, and I told her that I was sitting in a park, reading a very old contract that suddenly felt new again. Sophia asked me to come to her office the next day. It was in an older building in the center, with a narrow staircase and a calm hallway that smelled of paper and coffee. Her name was on a small sign near the door. When I entered, she stood up from her desk and came around it to greet me. She looked almost the same as I remembered from years ago, only with a few more lines on her face and a different haircut. Her eyes were still sharp. She asked me to sit and to tell her everything from the beginning. I started with the exhibition, with Jonas and the note, with the camera label next to my face. Then I described the meeting in Adrian's office, the new contract, the plate removed from the old system frame. I spoke slowly, trying to keep to facts, not complaints. Sophia listened without interrupting, her hands folded on the table. When I finished, she asked if I still had the original contract and the messages from that time. I took out my phone and the USB drive I had prepared the night before. On the USB were scans and files I had backed up when I left the company. On the phone were the emails I had found on the park bench. She moved her laptop closer and asked if she could copy them to her system. I said yes. She did not open them in front of me right away. First, she asked some simple questions. When we had signed, who had been in the room, what the company looked like at that time, whether any later changes had been written and signed. I answered each one as clearly as I could. She typed notes as I spoke. Then she opened the digital contract and scrolled through it. Her face stayed neutral, but I could see the muscles in her jaw work as she read. She asked me if I remembered a certain section, the one she had insisted on years ago. I nodded. That was the part about who owned the core design and who only had a license. She said that the document was very clear on that point. She explained in simple terms that I was the owner of the central design and control logic, and that the company had only been given permission to use it under certain conditions. She listed them without legal words: regular payments, correct credit and public use, and respect for safety and quality rules. She said that if these points were broken, I had the right to stop the company from using my work. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness as she spoke. I had known this in theory all along, but I had tried not to think about it, because I did not want to fight with people I had once called friends and family. Hearing her lay it out, calm and firm, made it real in a different way. Sophia asked if I knew whether all payments had been made and whether my name still appeared where it should. I told her what Jonas had shown me at the exhibition and what I had seen in the hall. I also admitted that I did not know the full payment history because the transfers had become less clear over the years. She said that this was our next step. She suggested that I request a record from the bank back to the first project. She also said that she wanted to see how often and where the system was being used now. She leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a moment. She said that I had been patient for a very long time, maybe too long. She added that it was good that I had not signed anything new. Then she told me that if I was ready, she would help me understand my position fully and see what options I had. Her voice was calm, not dramatic. It sounded like someone talking about a complex but solvable technical problem. When I left her office, she had a copy of my documents, and I had a small list of things to do. The first thing on the list was the bank. The bank branch I used was not far from my apartment. It was a plain space, quiet, with a few desks and a row of chairs. A clerk led me to a small meeting room when I explained that I needed a detailed record of certain payments over the past years. I gave him the names and the dates I remembered. He asked me to wait while he checked the system. I sat in the room and watched dust float in a beam of light from the window. After some time, the clerk returned with a printed list and a digital copy on a small drive. He explained the periods and the amounts in simple words. I saw lines of regular payments for several years, then a gap, then smaller and irregular amounts. The recent section was almost empty, even though I knew that the system was installed in more and more places. The clerk asked if everything was clear. I thanked him and said that it was more clear than before. When I stepped out onto the street, I felt like I had just looked at the inside of a machine I had never opened before. From the bank, I went to a co-working space that Sophia had suggested. She said that if I was going to stand on my own feet again, I needed more than a folder of documents. I needed a place, even a small one, that was not my kitchen table. The co-working space was on the 5th floor of a building with a lift that made a soft hum. Inside, there were desks, chairs, a coffee machine, and people working quietly at laptops. The manager gave me a short tour and explained the simple rules. Pay a monthly fee, get a desk, use the internet, and respect others' silence. I took a modest plan with a fixed desk and a small locker. It was the first time in a long while that I had signed something for a new beginning, not as a closing step. I set my laptop on the desk and opened a blank document. On the top line, I wrote my own name, then the name of the control system I had once created before it got a market label. It felt odd, like speaking a word that had not been spoken out loud for years. Then I started a simple plan. What my new small company would do, what I could offer, how I might present myself directly to clients. I did not design fancy logos or long mission statements. I wrote about what I knew how to do: design stable control logic, create safe and flexible setups, solve problems in the field. I wrote that I valued clear records and long-term reliability. When I read it back to myself, it sounded like me, not like a brand consultant. Later that week, I met Jonas again at the exhibition center. He had sent me a short message saying that he wanted to show me something. We agreed on a time when the hall was closed to the public. I entered through the same side door, and he let me in without speaking much in the hallway. In the control room, he closed the door and pulled down a blind over the inner window so people in the hall could not see us. The room felt smaller with the blind down, but it also felt protected. He sat at the main console and opened a set of files on his screen. He explained that the system kept an automatic log of every show, every test, every time a sequence ran. Dates, times, and versions were all recorded. He said that he had copied the logs from the exhibition and from several other projects that ran on the same central server. He had saved them onto a drive. He did not show me every line. There were too many. Instead, he pointed to sections where the system ID and version matched the design that had come from my original work. He showed me how these entries lined up with the gaps in my payment record. He said that from a technician's view, it was very clear. The company had used this system widely, even in recent projects, while financial and credit parts of the agreement had faded away. He also told me that he had heard some of the managers talk in the hallway. He had heard them say that once the new investor round was complete and the brand was stronger, they could rewrite the history and fully own the system, because the older engineer was easy to push aside. He did not repeat the exact words, but the meaning was clear. I listened and felt my earlier calm settle in more deeply. What had been suspicion now had form. Jonas handed me the drive with the logs. He said that he trusted me to use them well. He did not want to be in the middle of open conflict, but he could not stand watching the true story vanish. I told him that I understood and that I would not throw his name around. In that small glass room, I felt that I finally had an ally who saw the technical side as clearly as I did. When I brought the bank records and the logs back to Sophia's office, she looked at them carefully. She compared dates, amounts, and usage patterns. She made small marks in the margin of her notes and nodded to herself from time to time. Then she said that the pattern was strong. They had kept using my system, had reduced or stopped payments, and had erased my credit in public spaces. In her view, they were well past the line where I could act if I wanted to. I asked what act meant exactly. She explained that there were several levels. The first would be to send a formal notice to the company, reminding them of the agreement and telling them to correct things or risk losing their license. If they ignored that, the next step would be to end the license and to inform clients who depended on the system. She said that this would be serious because it would mean that they could not legally use my design anymore. I asked her if this could really work against a company with investors and a strong brand. She said that brands do not change facts. She reminded me that we were not making new demands. We were asking them to respect the deal they had once been happy to sign. Her voice remained calm, but there was a firmness in it that gave me more confidence than any big speech could have. Before I left, Sophia showed me her digital calendar on the screen. There was a date marked 2 weeks from then with a bright color. She said that Adrian's company had announced a large presentation for investors and clients at the exhibition hall on that day. They would show new projects and talk about future plans. She had learned about it through a contact. She pointed at the date and said that timing mattered. She explained that if we wanted to remind them of the agreement and our rights, we could choose when to do it. She asked me if I preferred a quiet path, with letters and private talks, or if I was ready to let the facts appear in a more public way if they refused to listen. I looked at the small square on the calendar. In my mind, I saw the hall again, the moving lights, the investors by the column, my son in his sharp jacket. I thought about years of quiet work and years of quiet disrespect. I also thought about Jonas in the control room and Clara, the client representative who had always respected my technical reports in the past. Sophia waited without pressing me. Finally, I told her that I did not want to shout or make a scene, but that I also did not want to hide anymore. I said that if they respected the agreement, then good. If they did not, then I wanted the people who depended on the system to know who really held the rights and who kept the promises. She nodded and tapped the date on the screen again. She said that we had some days to prepare and that she would draft something for me to approve. Then she asked me one simple question, in her usual direct way. She asked if I was ready for that day to be the moment when I stopped letting others write my story for me. In the days after the meeting with Sophia, life on the surface stayed almost the same. I still woke up in my small apartment, boiled water for tea, and sat at the same table. But inside, something had shifted. Before, I had tried to forget the old contract and the missing plate in the workshop. Now, I could not unsee them. The difference was that this new awareness did not pull me into anger, it pulled me into action. I spent more time at the co-working space. My desk was near a window that looked onto a quiet street. People walked by with bags and bicycles, unaware that in this simple room, I was trying to pull my own name back from a story that no longer belonged to me. On my laptop, I wrote a short document that described who I was and what I did. It was not long, just 1 page. I wrote that I had designed the core of a widely used light control system, that I valued long-term stability, and that I now offered my services through my own small company. Sophia helped me with the formal steps. She arranged the registration for the new firm and showed me where to sign. When I hesitated in front of each line, she reminded me that I was not giving anything away this time. I was simply placing my own work under my own roof. The feeling was new. For many years, my work had lived under other names and logos. Now, even if the office was just a shared desk and a locked drawer, it was mine. One morning at the co-working space, Sophia called. Her voice sounded alert, but not worried. She said that there was someone I should meet. A representative from a cultural foundation, a long-term client of the company, had asked to speak with the actual creator of the system. The representative's name was Clara. She had seen my name in some old project files and had noticed that it had quietly vanished from new ones. She had asked a simple question. Why? Sophia said that she had not told Clara every detail, but that she had confirmed that I was indeed the original designer. Clara had then asked for a meeting, and she wanted me to be there in person. I agreed. The Foundation's building was elegant, but not flashy. Inside, there was a boardroom with a long wooden table and a large window that looked onto a courtyard. Shelves on the walls held books about art, architecture, and public projects. Clara entered with a folder in her hands and sat opposite me. She was in her mid-40s, with calm eyes and a presence that felt steady. Sophia sat to my left with her notebook. Clara began by saying that she cared about continuity. She said that her foundation supported projects that were meant to last, not just look good in photos. She explained that they had installed the light system in several of their buildings and that it was important to know whom they were really working with. Then she asked me, very simply, to tell her my version of the story. I told her about the early days in the lab, about building the first prototypes, about training Adrian when he was young. I described how the company had grown, how my role had moved from central to almost invisible, how credits had slipped away and payments had become irregular. I tried not to turn it into a complaint. I spoke as an engineer explaining how a circuit had slowly been rewired in the wrong way. Clara listened with her hands folded. When I finished, she turned to Sophia and asked for a summary of the agreement in words she could take to her own board. Sophia explained the basic points, that I owned the core design and control logic, that the company had a license, and that this license was tied to credit and payment. She did not show any documents yet. She just stated the structure. Clara then told us what she had heard from Adrian's side. According to him, the original engineer had been involved only in early trials and had given full control to the company later. He had said that any mention of me now was only out of politeness. He had also said that the company was planning a new generation of the system that would be fully theirs. Clara compared these two versions in silence for a moment. Then she asked one question that cut through all the decoration. Who could prove their claim with older records, not just new speeches? Sophia said quietly that we could. Clara looked at me and said that she had always respected people who built things. She explained that her foundation had a long-term contract with the company, but that it was not tied to any one person. If it turned out that the core of the system belonged to me and that the company had broken its promises, she would have to rethink that partnership. Her duty, she said, was to the stability of her projects and to honesty. She asked whether I wanted to fight or to protect. The way she said it, the two paths were not the same. I thought about it. I told her that I did not want to destroy anything. I did not want buildings to go dark or events to fail. I wanted to protect the work and make sure that the people who cared about it knew the truth. I said that I wanted those who built their shows on the system to have a clear and legal base. Clara nodded. She said that this answer matched what she had seen of my work in the past. She did not make a big promise then, but she said that if, in the coming days, she received clear proof that the agreement was, as Sophia described, she would be ready to adjust her contracts and, if needed, to stand beside the original creator. When the meeting ended, she shook my hand with the same calm strength she had shown during the talk. She said that she hoped the situation could be resolved without chaos, but that sometimes order needed a sharp line. Back in Sophia's office afterward, we talked about the next steps. She showed me a draft of a formal notice to Adrian's company. It was simple, almost cold in its tone. It reminded them of the original agreement, listed the broken points in a neutral way, and stated that unless they corrected them, the license could be ended. It also mentioned that some clients had been informed of the situation in principle. She asked me to read it and to say if I felt it was fair. The words were precise. They did not attack. They did not accuse in emotional language. They only described and warned. When I reached the end, I realized that my hands were not shaking. I felt steady. I told her that I agreed. We discussed timing. The investor presentation at the exhibition hall was growing close. Public announcements about the event were already online. There were posts on social media showing Adrian walking through the hall, pointing at installations, speaking about the future. Lucas appeared in the background of some of these videos, smiling and taking notes. The company spoke about opening a new era for the system. Sophia suggested that the notice be sent close to the event, but not on the day itself. She wanted to give them a chance to respond, to correct things, or at least to acknowledge the issue. That way, if they chose to ignore it and still use my system in the show, they would do so after a clear warning. We chose a date. On that day, Sophia sent the notice by email and by registered mail. She copied it to the address Adrian used for investor communications. She also sent a polite message to Clara, saying that the formal step had been taken. For a few days, we waited. I spent time at the co-working space, refining my own small company's presentation. I wrote a short description for a basic website. I listed the services I could offer: consulting for existing installations, design of new projects, support for transitions. I did not mention Adrian or his firm anywhere. I did not want my new beginning to be a list of complaints. I wanted it to be something that could stand on its own. No answer came from Adrian. There was no call, no mail, no message. The only signs of his reaction were indirect. The company's public channels kept talking about the upcoming event, but now there were small hints of tension in the language. Phrases about solid ownership and complete control appeared more often. It was as if they were trying to convince themselves as much as the audience. Then the day before the event, Sophia forwarded me a short email. It was from one of Adrian's legal assistants. The tone was cold. It said that they had received our notice, that they disagreed with our reading of the agreement, and that they would continue with their plans. Though it also suggested that any further contact should go through lawyers. There was no sign of doubt in the words, but the fact that they answered at all told me that they had taken it seriously. Sophia looked at me across her desk after we read it. She said that, in a way, this made things clearer. They had been reminded of the agreement and the conditions. They had chosen to move forward anyway. Whatever happened at the event now would not be an accident or a misunderstanding. It would be a choice. On the morning of the presentation, I woke up earlier than usual. The city outside my window was still pale with light. I dressed in a simple but clean shirt and jacket. I did not wear anything new or dramatic. I wanted to feel like myself, not like an actor. Before I left, I opened the old photo of me and Adrian in the lab. I looked at our younger faces and at the mess of wires behind us. I remembered the sound of the first test run, the excitement we had shared. For a moment, I felt a wave of sadness for the version of him that had been in that room and for the version of me who had believed that mutual respect would last by itself. Then I placed the photo back in the folder and closed it. Outside, the air was crisp. I took the tram again, as I had done on the day this all started. The route was the same. The feeling in my chest was different. I was not going as a forgotten guest now. I was going as the person whose work made the show possible, with the knowledge that the paper in Sophia's office and the files on her computer backed that up. I arrived a little early and stood for a moment on the plaza in front of the exhibition center. Large posters showed Adrian's face and the name of the event. Slogans about light, future, and vision were printed in bold letters. Staff moved equipment cases through side doors. Some early guests were already entering the main door, dressed in good suits and dresses. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara. She wrote that she was inside, in a side room, and that she had brought some members of her board. She added one short line: "We are ready to listen." Another message came in from Sophia. She wrote that all the necessary letters, records, and client agreements were in place. She asked if I was ready for the next part. I looked up at the building and at the posters that carried a story without my name. I thought about the control room above the hall, about Jonas at the console, about the logs stored on the drive he had given me. I thought about the quiet small print in the old contract and about the simple plate that had once held my name on the steel frame. My fingers closed firmly around the phone. I wrote back to Sophia that I was ready. Then I took a breath, walked toward the main doors of the exhibition center, and pushed one open. The main hall already felt different when I stepped inside. Rows of chairs faced a small stage. Screens hung along the walls, all showing the company logo and a countdown clock. Soft music played, and groups of investors talked in low voices. Staff moved between them with trays of water. Near the front, I saw Adrian. He stood with a group, smiling, holding a tablet. Lucas was beside him, speaking to a camera crew. I stayed at the side, near a pillar, where I could see the control room window above. Behind the glass, I could make out a figure at the console. I knew it was Jonas. After a few minutes, the lights dimmed. The countdown on the screens reached 0, and the hall grew quiet. Adrian walked to the stage. The host introduced him as the creator and mind behind the system. People applauded. I heard my own work described in words that did not include my name. Adrian began to speak. He talked about vision, about the future of interactive spaces, about how his company had built this platform from nothing. He pointed at the lights as they moved in perfect sync with his voice. He told the audience that they now had complete ownership of the technology and that the next step would be total control over new markets. I watched him from the side. My heart beat faster, but my breathing stayed calm. At one point, his eyes passed over the crowd and paused on me. For a second, his expression flickered. Then he looked away and continued, as if nothing had changed. At a signal I could not see, Jonas acted. The moving lights slowed, then stopped. The patterns froze in mid-motion. A soft murmur rose from the chairs. Adrian turned toward the screens and back to the audience, trying to keep his voice steady. He said that there seemed to be a small technical issue and that it would be fixed in a moment. Instead, the screens on the walls changed. The company logo faded. In its place, clear text appeared. At the top was the name of the system, the one I had written on my laptop in the co-working space. Under it, in plain letters, was my full name as creator and owner. Below that, a short excerpt from the original contract showed the key line, that the design and control logic belonged to me and that the company held only a license, bound to payment and credit. A hush fell over the room. People leaned forward to read. I saw some phones come up as investors and guests took photos of the screens. Adrian stood frozen on the stage, tablet in his hand, mouth half open. Lucas stared at the walls, his face pale. From the side aisle, Sophia walked toward the stage, holding a folder. Clara and 2 members of her board followed behind her. Nobody tried to stop them. The moment felt too strange, too heavy. When they reached the front, Sophia turned to Adrian and held out an envelope. She explained in a clear voice that this was the formal notice ending the company's license to use my system. She said that it took effect now because the conditions in the agreement had been broken and because their written reply had refused to correct them. Clara stepped forward. She addressed the audience, not just Adrian. She said that her foundation had reviewed the original agreement, the payment records, and the project logs. She explained that they had decided to transfer their projects and future contracts to my new firm as the rightful owner. She added that several other partners were ready to do the same because trust was more important than a brand name. In the control room above, Jonas changed the screens again. Now they showed simple charts, a timeline of payments, then long empty gaps, next to usage logs of the system running in many sites. The dates matched. There was no need for dramatic words. The numbers spoke. An investor near the front row stood up. Others followed. Some walked toward Clara. Some moved to the exits, talking in urgent tones. A few approached Sophia, asking quiet but intense questions. Adrian tried to raise his voice and say that this was all a misunderstanding, that I was only a former employee. Sophia, still calm, pointed to the contract text on the wall and repeated that we were not asking for anything new, only for respect of what had been signed years ago. Lucas looked at me then. Our eyes met across the hall. I saw confusion there, and something like shame. He took a step in my direction as if he wanted to speak, then stopped. People were moving around him, and his role as brand director suddenly had no clear stage. The hall's lighting shifted again. The old company logo faded entirely from the screens. Only my name, the system name, and a short line remained. Licensed use ended. New contact, my small firm. Jonas had told me that he could do this with one command, but seeing it actually happen in front of a full room was something else. Adrian lowered his tablet. For the first time since I had known him as a leader, he seemed to have nothing to say. No story, no spin, no new slogan. The shiny image he had built around himself now faced something it could not easily cover. Plain text, dates, and clauses in front of people who cared about facts. I did not walk onto the stage. I did not raise my arms or ask for attention. I simply stood near the side pillar and watched as the center of gravity in that room shifted. People who had looked only at Adrian now turned their heads in other directions, toward Sophia, toward Clara, and from time to time, toward me. After a while, there was nothing more to add. The main points were on the walls and in the folders. The investors would take them home. The clients would decide. The system I had built would keep running, but not on the story that had erased me. I turned and walked toward the exit. As I reached the door, I looked back once. On the stage, chairs were empty. On the screens, my name stood still in the light, clear and simple.